The underground parking lot was nearly deserted. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long shadows across rows of polished cars. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and damp concrete, the kind of atmosphere where every echo seemed magnified, every footstep suspiciously loud. Jonathan Miller, 52 years old, walked briskly toward his black BMW. He was a man used to control of his company, of his employees, of his carefully ordered life. Tonight had been another long day at the headquarters of Miller Industries, the technology empire he had built from scratch. His mind was already drifting toward tomorrow, the most important day of his career. A $400 million merger, with Japanese investors awaited. Success would double the value of his company. Failure. He did not even want to imagine. His Italian leather shoes clicked softly against the concrete. He unlocked the BMW with a short beep, the sound echoing, like a gunshot in the cavernous lot. Adjusting his tie, Jonathan exhaled, ready to sink into the comfort of his luxury car. But before he could even slide behind the wheel, a voice, sharp, high-pitched, urgent, cut through the silence. "Shut up! Don't say a word!" Jonathan froze. The car key trembled between his fingers. His eyes darted left, right. Was someone behind him? But the sound hadn't come from the shadows. It came from inside his own car. He leaned forward cautiously, peering into the dim interior. That was when he saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, sat hunched in the back seat. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest, her small hands trembling against her dirty dress. Her dark skin glistened under the faint light filtering through the windshield, and her wide brown eyes shone with fear and urgency. Jonathan's first instinct was disbelief. Was this real? Was he imagining it? The exhaustion of the day playing tricks on him? But then she spoke again, this time softer, her voice almost trembling. "Please, don't speak. They're listening." Jonathan's heartbeat quickened. His grip on the door tightened. They're listening? Who was they? And what on earth was a child doing inside his locked BMW? Slowly, carefully, he slipped into the driver's seat, his movements measured so as not to startle her. His voice was low, steady, the practiced tone of a businessman facing an unexpected problem. "Who are you? And how did you get into my car?" The girl glanced nervously over his shoulder toward the glass corporate building looming above them. Its 10th floor was still lit, windows glowing like watchful eyes in the night. She leaned closer, whispering, her breath shaky but deliberate. "Your partner. His wife. They said you'd be here now. I hid in your car because they're going to take everything from you. Tomorrow." Jonathan's blood ran cold. His partner? His wife? What was she talking about? The child, dirty clothes hanging loosely from her thin frame, shifted slightly, revealing a face far older than her. Years. Life had etched wisdom into her small features, the kind of wisdom born from hardship. He stared at her, struggling to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding in his luxury car. The girl, a complete stranger, warning him about betrayal in his own company? It was unthinkable. And yet, the fear in her eyes was undeniable. Tomorrow. Jonathan muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. Tomorrow was the merger. Tomorrow was everything. The girl nodded, almost as if she could read his thoughts. Her whisper sharpened, urgent, slicing through the heavy air of the parking lot. "They're planning it. I heard them. They laughed about you. Said you were stupid. Said after tomorrow, you'll have nothing left." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. His pulse hammered in his ears. He had spent 15 years trusting Marcus Williams, his partner, more than anyone else. 10 years depending on Diana Foster, his loyal assistant. And now this child was telling him that those very people were plotting to ruin him? It was absurd, impossible. And yet, a flicker of doubt wormed its way into his mind. He turned toward the building once more. Up on the 10th floor, the lights began to flicker off one by one. Somewhere inside, Marcus and Diana were likely finishing their preparations for tomorrow. Jonathan's chest tightened. The weight of suspicion pressed down like a physical force, and in the back seat of his BMW, the unlikely messenger, a 7-year-old black girl he had never seen before, curled into herself. Her voice, breaking into a whisper that would change the course of his life forever. "If you don't believe me, you'll lose everything," just like they said. Jonathan Miller had always believed his life was a fortress, stable, predictable, and safe. For over 3 decades, he had poured everything he had into Miller Industries. What began as a tiny startup in his garage had grown into a $200 million technology empire. His days were defined by boardrooms, contracts, and negotiations. His reputation, that of a sharp, visionary leader who could outthink competitors and inspire loyalty. But beneath the success, Jonathan's true weakness had always been trust. He trusted Marcus Williams, his partner of 15 years, like a brother. He trusted Diana Foster, his executive assistant of a decade, like family. In fact, his colleagues often teased him that Marcus and Diana practically ran his life. They scheduled his days, managed his accounts, prepared his presentations. Jonathan never questioned them. Why would he? They had been with him through the rise, through every victory and defeat. To Jonathan, loyalty was everything. And now, in the dim light of his BMW, a child he had never seen before was threatening to shatter that trust with just a few whispered words. The girl, Jasmine, sat huddled in the corner of the back seat, eyes still darting nervously at the tall glass building looming above them. Her voice was quiet, but the conviction in her tone was undeniable. Jonathan studied her more carefully. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her shoes were scuffed, her dress faded. She smelled faintly of the street, dust, rain, and survival. Yet her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and far too old for her tiny frame. Finally, Jonathan asked the question burning in his mind. "Why are you here, Jasmine? Why risk hiding in a stranger's car?" The girl hesitated, pulling her knees tighter, against her chest. For a moment, Jonathan thought she wouldn't answer. But then she lifted her chin, and her words carried the weight of a truth she had lived far too young. "Because I know what it's like when people don't see you. When they think you're nothing. At school, they laughed at me, called me names, said I was dirty, said I didn't belong. I tried to tell the teachers, but they just said, ignore it. So I stopped talking. I stopped fighting. But I never stopped listening." Jonathan felt something stir inside him, something uncomfortably close to guilt. She wasn't just a frightened child. She was a mirror of something deeper, invisible, overlooked, dismissed. Jasmine's voice wavered, but her eyes locked onto his with surprising strength. "Tonight, when I was cleaning near the offices, I heard them. They were talking about you like you were invisible too, like you were stupid, like your whole life didn't matter. And I thought, if I can warn you, maybe I can stop what's about to happen." The words pierced him. He had spent his life building an empire, and yet this child, a girl society had already decided didn't matter, was the only one protecting it. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his mind spinning. He remembered his own youth, how he had been dismissed, underestimated, called a fool for leaving a stable job to chase his ridiculous dream. How many nights had he worked in his garage, mocked by neighbors, pitied by friends? He too had known the sting of invisibility. But unlike Jasmine, his skin had shielded him from the harsher cruelties of the world. He had been doubted, yes, but never targeted for the color of his face. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, as if aware of his thoughts. My grandma always told me, when you see someone getting stepped on and you can help, you help. Because one day it could be you. Tonight, it's you, Mr. Miller. Her words landed heavier than any boardroom speech, heavier than any investor's advice. Jonathan gripped the steering wheel, though the car hadn't even started. A bitter realization swept over him. A 7-year-old girl, battered by life and scarred by racism, saw the betrayal he had been blind to. She had no reason to protect him, no stake in his empire, and yet she had risked everything to slip into his car and warn him. Above them, the 10th floor lights flickered again. Marcus and Diana were finishing their work, confident in their coming victory. They believed Jonathan was too trusting, too naive, too blind. But sitting in the back seat was proof that the world sees what you cannot. And sometimes it takes the most overlooked person, the child dismissed by society, to expose the lies of those closest to you. Jonathan turned the key slowly, the engine humming to life. For the first time in years, his fortress of trust felt fragile. Tomorrow was no longer just about a merger. Tomorrow was about survival, and beside him, his unlikely ally, the invisible child who refused to stay silent, had already changed everything. The streets were quiet as Jonathan steered the BMW out of the parking lot, but his mind was far from calm. Jasmine sat silently in the back seat, her small frame barely visible in the rearview mirror. The glow of street lights flickered across her face, and for a fleeting moment Jonathan wondered if this could all be some strange hallucination. A 7-year-old hiding in his car, warning him of betrayal? It sounded absurd, but then her words echoed again in his head. Tomorrow you won't own anything anymore. Jonathan's chest tightened. Tomorrow was the merger, months of preparation, endless meetings, late nights, all orchestrated by Marcus and Diana. They had insisted on handling every detail. He remembered Diana smiling reassuringly. Don't worry, Jonathan. Just focus on the investors. We'll handle the contracts. Now. That smile felt poisoned. Jonathan cleared his throat, his voice heavy. Tell me exactly what you heard, Jasmine. Every word. The little girl leaned forward, her tone urgent but careful, as though each sentence carried danger. They were in the office upstairs. Marcus was laughing. He said, Tomorrow, the fool won't even read the papers. He'll sign, and by the time he realizes, everything will already belong to us. Her eyes glistened in the rearview mirror. The blonde woman, Diana, she said you trust them like a little dog. She laughed and said, and tomorrow he'll find out that little dogs sometimes get bitten. The words hit Jonathan like a blow to the stomach. 15 years of friendship, 10 years of loyalty, reduced to mockery behind closed doors. He gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. Jasmine continued, her voice trembling now. They said nasty things about you, things I don't even want to repeat. But they also said that after tomorrow, you'll have to beg for a job, that you'll lose everything. Jonathan's throat went dry. He had built Miller Industries from nothing, sacrificed nights, friendships, even his marriage for this empire. And now his most trusted people were plotting to strip it away. For a moment, anger surged inside him. He imagined storming into the office right then, confronting them, demanding answers. But as quickly as the thought came, he pushed it down. Rage would only expose his suspicion. If Jasmine was right, Marcus and Diana were setting a trap. He needed to think, not lash out. He glanced at the girl again. Her clothes were torn, her face smudged, but her courage was unmistakable. She had no reason to lie. She could have stayed, hidden, kept silent. And yet she chose to warn him. Why? He asked softly, almost whispering to himself. Why risk it for me? You don't even know me. Jasmine hesitated, then lifted her chin with quiet determination. Because I know what it's like when people step on you. They think you don't matter. Tonight they talked about you like that, like you were invisible. My grandma always said, if you can help someone when they're being crushed, you help. Because next time, it might be you. The simplicity of her words disarmed him. A child, living with nothing, had more integrity than the people he had trusted with everything. Jonathan slowed at a red light, his reflection staring back at him in the windshield. He saw not the confident CEO the world admired, but a man who had allowed loyalty to blind him. For 15 years, Marcus had been his partner in every decision. For 10 years, Diana had managed his life with precision, and now, if Jasmine was right, they were preparing to destroy him in a single stroke. The light turned green, but Jonathan didn't move. He sat there, absorbing the weight of betrayal, the neon glow washing over him. Finally, with a deep breath, he pressed the accelerator. As the car moved through the empty streets, Jasmine leaned back, her voice barely above a whisper. They're sure you won't see it coming. That's why they weren't afraid to laugh about it. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Perhaps Marcus and Diana thought of him as a sentimental fool, a blind lamb walking willingly into slaughter. But they were wrong. Tonight, thanks to the most unlikely messenger, he finally saw the knife waiting for his back, and he was no longer walking into their trap blind. Sleep refused to come that night. Jonathan lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with every flicker of the street lamp outside. His mind replayed Jasmine's words on a relentless loop. Tomorrow you won't own anything anymore. They said you're an obedient little dog. 15 years of partnership, 10 years of trust, and in a single evening, all of it had soured into doubt. Jonathan tried to reason with himself. Perhaps Jasmine had misunderstood. Perhaps the child, shaped by hardship and fear, had let her. Imagination run wild. And yet, deep down, he knew better. The laughter she described, the mocking tone. He had seen flickers of arrogance in Marcus's smile before, subtle cracks in Diana's loyalty. He had ignored them. Now those cracks looked like chasms. By 3 a.m., Jonathan gave up on sleep. He showered, dressed, and left his penthouse. Driving aimlessly through the quiet city, he finally pulled into a run-down diner on the edge of town. The place smelled of old coffee and fried bacon, its neon sign buzzing against the night sky. He and Jasmine slipped into a booth at the far corner, as if hiding from the world. Jasmine attacked a hamburger with the ferocity of someone who didn't know when her next meal would come. Jonathan sipped a cup of coffee gone cold before it, even touched his lips. Silence stretched between them until his phone buzzed on the table. A message from Marcus lit up the screen. Ready for tomorrow, buddy? The Japanese are going to love our proposal. You're about to retire rich. Jonathan's throat tightened as he turned the phone toward Jasmine. She smirked, ketchup still on her lips. He's got some nerve. Lying to your face while planning to stab you in the back. Jonathan forced a smile, though rage burned in his chest. His fingers hovered above the screen before typing a calm, friendly reply. Yes, I can't wait, Marcus. Tomorrow will be perfect. A few minutes later, another vibration shook the table. This time it was Diana. Jonathan, I've reviewed the final contracts. Everything is ready for signing. Trust me as you always have. The words cut deeper than Marcus's arrogance. Diana, his confidant, the woman who had known his schedules better than he did, the one he had leaned on for 10 years, was preparing to ruin him with the same soft voice she had used to guide him through every challenge. Jonathan's hand trembled as he set the phone down. Jasmine watched him closely, her child's voice steady. They think you're weak. They think kindness makes you stupid. But you're not stupid, are you? Jonathan looked at her, surprised by the certainty in her eyes. For the first time, in weeks, he smiled. Not the hollow, polite smile of a businessman, but something real, something edged with determination. "No," he said softly. "I'm not." The diner's clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, the first hint of dawn painted the sky. Jonathan felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. Marcus and Diana thought tomorrow would be his downfall. Instead, it would be their reckoning. But Jasmine's warning had also exposed another truth, one that shook him more than betrayal. He had allowed himself to be blind. He had trusted too easily, assumed loyalty was permanent. It had taken a child, beaten down by society, to remind him that trust without vigilance was a dangerous weakness. As they left the diner, Jonathan checked his phone again. Another message from Marcus. "Get some rest, my friend. Tomorrow is the beginning of a new era." Jonathan slipped the phone into his pocket, his jaw tightening. Yes, tomorrow would be a new era. But not the one Marcus and Diana expected. For now, he would play along. He would smile, nod, and sign whatever they placed in front of him. He would be the obedient little dog, until the moment the leash snapped back around their throats. And when it did, they would learn that Jonathan Miller was not the fool they believed. Morning crept into the city, but Jonathan Miller felt no fatigue. After a sleepless night and a meal that tasted of betrayal more than food, he had made a decision. He would not walk into Marcus and Diana's trap blind. If they thought he was weak, he would let them believe it, long enough to pull the ground from under their feet. But he needed help. Someone who understood deception, someone who could uncover what his blind trust had hidden for years. There was only one name that came to mind: Gabriel Torres. Jonathan hadn't spoken to Gabriel in over a year. Gabriel had been his company's investigator, a man trained to check backgrounds, audit deals, and sniff out fraud before it became poison. But Marcus and Diana had insisted Gabriel was too expensive and unnecessary. They'd called it a budget cut, but Jonathan now saw the truth. They had removed the one man sharp enough to expose them. At 9 a.m., Jonathan dialed a familiar number. The line clicked, and a deep, slightly groggy voice answered. Jonathan Miller. "I thought you'd forgotten about me." Jonathan gripped the phone tightly. "Gabriel, I need you. Today." There was a pause, then a low, dry laugh. "I always knew Marcus didn't like me. Now I know why." 2 hours later, Gabriel sat in Jonathan's kitchen. He was a man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered with tired eyes that had seen too much. Scars lined his hands from years as a police officer before private investigation. He looked at Jasmine, sitting at the table with toast crumbs on her cheeks, and shook his head with a kind of admiration. "So this little detective uncovered what a $200 million company's CEO didn't?" he muttered. "Remarkable." Jasmine grinned shyly, repeating the words she had learned from her grandmother. "When you have nothing, you learn to pay attention to everything." Gabriel studied her with a nod of respect before pulling a tablet. From his bag, he swiped through documents, his finger pausing on spreadsheets, contracts, and emails. "I never liked the way I was fired," Gabriel admitted. "So I kept digging, just for myself. Marcus and Diana aren't just plotting betrayal. They're running a full-scale crime operation. Look here." Jonathan leaned forward as Gabriel revealed the evidence. Suspicious bank transfers. Shell. Companies created under false names. Phantom clients who existed only on paper. Over the past 2 years, Gabriel continued, they've siphoned more than $5 million from your company. Tomorrow's merger isn't for growth. It's to launder everything. They need your signature to validate the transfers. Once you sign, they'll push you out and walk away clean. Jonathan's face hardened. He wasn't just dealing with betrayal anymore. This was organized crime, built on his name and trust. His fist clenched on the table. "They stole from me," From the company I built with my own hands. And they laughed while they did it. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. Now it gets interesting. They think you're stupid. But you have us. And they don't know that. Jonathan looked at her. This child who had nothing yet gave him everything. And then at Gabriel, the investigator cast aside for being too thorough. For the first time in months, he felt something ignite within him. Not fear, not despair, but determination. Gabriel met his gaze. You have two options. Call the police now and hope the courts don't let them slip away on technicalities, or let them hang themselves. Walk into that meeting tomorrow, play the role they expect, and then pull the trap when the evidence is undeniable. Jonathan thought of Marcus's arrogant smile, Diana's condescending assurances. They believed tomorrow would be their victory. No, Jonathan said slowly, each word sharp. Tomorrow will be their execution. Jasmine clapped her hands, softly, like a child watching her favorite part of a movie. You'll pretend you don't know. You'll smile, sign. And then they'll see the truth too late. Gabriel allowed himself the faintest smile. Exactly. Jonathan leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days. The pieces were coming together. Marcus and Diana thought they were leading a lamb to slaughter. What they didn't know was that the lamb had grown sharp fangs. Tomorrow, Jonathan would walk into that boardroom with the same calm smile he had worn for years. And when the time came, he would show them that kindness was not weakness. Kindness, when betrayed, could be lethal. At exactly 2 o'clock the next afternoon, the doors of the Miller Industries boardroom swung open. The long, polished table gleamed under fluorescent lights. Stacks of contracts and neatly arranged pens sat waiting like weapons disguised as stationery. Marcus Williams was already there, dressed in his usual sharp suit, a smile plastered across his face. To anyone else, he looked like the picture of loyalty. But Jonathan, seeing him through new eyes, noticed the smug tilt of his lips, the overconfidence radiating from his posture. Beside him stood Diana Foster, calm and efficient as always. She carried a leather briefcase and a stack of contracts marked with bright yellow tabs. Her smile was soft, motherly even, but Jonathan no longer saw comfort in it. He saw venom. "Jonathan," Marcus said warmly, crossing the room with arms open, wide. He hugged him like a brother. "Glad you're here. The Japanese are on their way. Everything is perfect." Diana stepped forward, setting the documents neatly before Jonathan. Her voice was smooth, dripping with false reassurance. "Boss, you just need to sign where I've marked. Trust me, as you always have." Jonathan looked down at the papers. Just a day earlier, he might have signed without hesitation, but not now. He took a slow breath, his face calm, giving nothing away. "Of course, Diana," he said evenly. "But before I sign, I'd like to show you something interesting." Marcus and Diana exchanged a quick glance, then forced their smiles back into place. Jonathan nodded toward the door. The handle turned, and in walked Gabriel Torres. Behind him, 2 federal investigators entered, carrying folders and evidence bags. Marcus's confident grin faltered. Diana's hands tightened around her briefcase. "Gabriel," Marcus muttered, his voice sharp. "I thought you didn't work for us anymore." Gabriel's tone was dry. "I don't. I work for the real owner of this company." Jonathan connected his laptop to the projector. The screen at the front of the room flickered, then lit up with spreadsheets, bank transfers, and company records. "Marcus." "Diana," Jonathan began, his voice steady, almost cold. "Do you recognize these?" Figures glowed across the screen. Millions. Siphoned into shell companies, contracts signed under false names, offshore accounts traced back to Marcus and Diana. Jonathan clicked again. Photographs appeared. Marcus entering offshore banks, Diana delivering envelopes to fake clients. $5.3 million, Jonathan continued. Stolen. Laundered through 17 shell companies you created. All under my nose. All using the trust I gave you. Marcus shot to his feet, his mask of charm falling away. Where did you get this? This information is private. Jonathan gave a short, bitter laugh. Private? Marcus, did you really think I built a $200 million company without learning how to protect myself? Diana's voice wavered as she tried to salvage the moment. Jonathan, this is a misunderstanding. These transactions have perfectly legal explanations. Gabriel stepped forward, handing envelopes to the investigators. Here are recordings of your conversations, planning the fraudulent merger. And here are sworn statements from 3 of your phantom clients, all ready to testify. Diana's face drained of color. Marcus's eyes blazed with fury. You can't prove anything, Marcus shouted, slamming a fist on the table. These are just accusations. Jonathan's smile was razor sharp. Marcus, do you remember Jasmine? Marcus blinked. Who the hell is Jasmine? The boardroom door opened again. A small figure stepped inside. Jasmine, escorted by a social worker, walked bravely to the table. Her eyes, wide but unflinching, locked onto Marcus. Hi, Mr. Marcus, she said softly. Remember me? I was hiding under your desk last night when you called Mr. Yamamoto, saying you were going to steal Mr. Jonathan's company. The silence was suffocating. Marcus stammered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Diana gasped, her composure unraveling. And then Gabriel pressed play on his phone. Diana's voice filled the room, clear and cruel. Jonathan is a sentimental idiot. The day after tomorrow, he'll be jobless, and we'll have everything. That clown will never know what hit him. Marcus's voice followed, dripping with contempt. 15 years pretending to be his friend. It'll be worth every second. When I see his face as he loses everything. Diana collapsed into her chair, shaking. Marcus roared in rage, slamming his fists until papers flew across the table. You bastard! You set us up! Jonathan's eyes narrowed. His voice was calm, deliberate, like a blade sliding between ribs. I didn't set you up, Marcus. You dug your own grave for 2 years. I just handed you the shovel. The investigator stepped forward. Marcus Williams, Diana Foster, you are under arrest for embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Handcuffs snapped around Marcus's wrists. He struggled, spitting curses. This won't stand, Jonathan. I'll destroy you. Jonathan adjusted his tie, his calm unshaken. You've already tried, Marcus. The difference is, I'm better at it than you are. Diana wept quietly as she was led away, her motherly facade shattered. Jonathan felt no pity. He remembered every smile, every reassuring word, every affectionate message, each one sharpened into a knife aimed at his back. Jasmine tugged lightly on his sleeve. Mr. Jonathan, are they really going to jail? Jonathan knelt so his eyes were level with hers. Yes, Jasmine, for a very long time. Gabriel closed his briefcase with quiet satisfaction. The Japanese have already canceled the merger, but 3 other companies called this morning, interested in legitimate partnerships. Miller Industries is stronger than ever, Jonathan, without the parasites. Jonathan looked out the window. Police cars pulled away, carrying Marcus and Diana into the darkness they had created for themselves. For 15 years, Jonathan had believed in them. For 10 years, he had treated them like family, and in return, they had turned his kindness into weakness. But today, in the very room where they thought they would destroy him, he had destroyed them instead. The boardroom was silent after the storm. Papers lay scattered, chairs pushed back hastily, and the echo of Marcus's curses still hung in the air. Jonathan Miller stood tall, watching the police vehicles vanish into the distance, carrying away the 2 people who had once been his closest allies. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not the fragile peace of ignorance, but the steady calm of truth revealed. His empire was safe, but more than that, his faith in himself had been restored. Beside him, Jasmine stood quietly, her small hand gripping the edge of his jacket. She looked up at him with wide eyes, a mixture of curiosity and relief. "Mr. Jonathan, are you sad?" she asked softly. Jonathan turned, kneeling so he could meet her gaze. He smiled gently, shaking his head. "No, Jasmine. For the first time in a very long time, I'm not sad at all." She tilted her head. "Why?" Jonathan's voice carried both gratitude and awe. "Because I've learned something. I've learned that there are people like you in this world, people who do the right thing even when there's nothing in it for them. That's worth more than any company." The weeks that followed moved quickly. Marcus and Diana's crimes unraveled like threads in a rotten fabric. Investigators uncovered more fraud, more victims, and more stolen money. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Diana received 8. Their assets were seized, their reputations destroyed. Miller Industries, cleansed of corruption, flourished. Freed from parasites, it grew stronger than ever. New investors lined up, eager to partner with a company that had survived betrayal and come out even more powerful. But for Jonathan, the biggest change wasn't in the boardroom. It was in his heart. He began to search for Jasmine's family records, determined to understand who this child truly was. What he discovered left him speechless. Jasmine's grandmother, Josephine Miller, had once been part of his own family. She was his cousin, the daughter of his father's brother. Decades ago, the family had lost contact after a bitter dispute. Life had scattered them, and Josephine had disappeared into hardship. When Jonathan showed Jasmine the old birth certificates, photographs, and genealogical records, her eyes filled with tears. She clutched the papers as though they were a treasure chest. "That means we're family?" Jonathan's voice broke as he pulled her into his arms. "Yes, Jasmine. We're family. We always were. You just didn't know it yet." She sobbed, against his shoulder, whispering, "Grandma always said family takes care of family." 3 months later, in the same courthouse where Marcus and Diana had been convicted, Jasmine wore a light blue dress and held Jonathan's hand tightly. Her eyes sparkled with nervous joy as the judge signed the final papers. "It's official," the judge said with a smile. "Jasmine Miller, you are now the daughter of Jonathan Miller." Applause filled the room. Jasmine beamed, looking up at her new father. "Dad," she said proudly, tasting the word for the first time. "Do you think Grandma knew this would happen?" Jonathan thought for a moment, his throat tightening. He remembered the night Jasmine had first appeared in his car, her voice trembling but brave. "Yes," he said softly. "I think your grandmother knew more than we'll ever realize, and I think she would be very proud of you." Years passed. Miller Industries climbed higher, becoming one of the 100 largest technology companies in the nation. But Jonathan's proudest creation wasn't measured in revenue or market share. It was the scholarship foundation he built in Jasmine's name, funding education and housing for hundreds of vulnerable children every year. Jasmine, now 12, became the honorary president of the program. She chose the children herself, mentoring them, guiding them, reminding them that invisibility didn't mean worthlessness. At the program's anniversary dinner, dressed in a neat school uniform, Jasmine stood before the crowd with confidence, far beyond her years. "Do you know what the best day of my life was?" she asked the audience. Jonathan, sitting in the front row, smiled knowingly. "Tell them, Jasmine." She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "The best day of my life was the day I got in Dad's car and told him to shut up. Because that day, I didn't just save a company. I found my family." The crowd erupted in applause. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears of pride. In the end, Marcus and Diana's betrayal had given Jonathan more than they had ever stolen. They had given him the gift of truth, the strength to see past blind loyalty, and most of all, a daughter who had taught him that real wealth wasn't in dollars. It was in courage, love, and justice. As Jonathan looked at Jasmine, laughing with her, "Friends, he understood something he wished he had known all along. True revenge isn't destroying your enemies. True revenge is building something so strong, so beautiful, that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a footnote in your story of success." And thanks to a little girl who once told him to be quiet, Jonathan Miller's story had only just begun.